on April 5, 1531. The sky over London was gray, as if nature itself could sense the horror about to unfold. A crowd gathered at Smithfield, a familiar sight for executions and cattle fairs. But today, something different awaited them. In the center of the square stood a large bronze cauldron placed on top of a blazing fire, with flames crackling as the water began to heat. A murmur rippled through the crowd as guards led a bound man into the square. Richard Roos, a cook in the service of Bishop John Pfizer. His pale face betrayed the terror he felt as he approached the cauldron, knowing he was about to face an execution unlike any other. In moments, he would be boiled alive, his skin slowly dissolving in the boiling water. How did a simple cook end up condemned to such a gruesome death? To understand this tragic story, we need to go back a few weeks to February 1531, when England was in turmoil. King Henry VIII was determined to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon in order to marry Anne Boleyn, a decision that divided the kingdom. On one side were those who supported the king's actions, while on the other were conservative clerics who believed that marriage was sacred and could not be undone. One of these clerics was Bishop John Pfizer, a staunch opponent of the king's divorce plans. Pfizer, a deeply religious man, had earned the wrath not only of Henry VIII, but also of the Boleyn family, who saw him as an obstacle to their ambitions. The bishop lived in constant fear for his life, taking extraordinary precautions to avoid being poisoned. He slept in different chambers each night, and even worried about the food and drink he consumed. His fears, as it turned out, were not without cause. At Pfizer's residence in Lambeth, just south of London, one of his servants was Richard Roos, the cook. Roos was an ordinary, middle-aged man who had never attracted attention until that fateful day in February. On February 18th, Pfizer hosted a meal for guests, and Roos prepared a thick soup, a common dish at the time. However, Roos secretly added a powder to the soup, claiming later that he believed it to be a harmless purgative. His intent, he argued, was simply to cause a little discomfort, not death. The bishop ate little of the soup, perhaps due to lack of appetite, while his guests consumed the larger portions. At the end of the meal, the leftover food was given to beggars, as was customary. Among those who received the food were Bennett Kerwin and Alice Triet, two humble individuals who were thrilled to be given hot food from a bishop's kitchen. Hours later, they experienced excruciating abdominal pain. The victims suffered vomiting, cold sweats, and convulsions. Pfizer, who had eaten little of the soup, survived. However, Bennett and Alice, who had eaten heartily, died in agony, their bodies found the next day in a state of torment. News of the poisoning spread quickly, and when King Henry VIII learned of it, he was furious. Although Pfizer was politically opposed to the king, the act of poisoning a bishop was seen as an attack on the monarchy itself. The king ordered an immediate investigation. Richard Roos was arrested while attempting to flee London and brought to the Tower of London. There, he was tortured on the rack, a device that stretched the victim's limbs to the breaking point. Under excruciating pain, Roos confessed to adding the powder to the soup, but he insisted he had not known it was lethal. He thought it was simply a purgative. The case quickly moved beyond normal legal procedures. On February 28th, King Henry VIII personally appeared before Parliament to report the crime, an extraordinary step for the time. The king described the poisoning as an act of high treason, not just against Pfizer, but also against the crown. Parliament, eager to please the king, quickly passed a law that classified poisoning as high treason, establishing death by boiling as a prescribed punishment. This act of cruelty was especially noteworthy. Henry VIII not only decided Roos's fate without a proper trial, but he also retroactively created a law to ensure that his punishment would be severe. The penalty for treason was already horrific: being dragged by horses, hanged nearly to death, castrated, and then quartered. But the king wanted something more. He wanted a punishment that mirrored the horror of poisoning, a slow, agonizing death in which the criminal would feel his body cooking. Why such brutality? Some historians suggest that Henry VIII had a genuine fear of poisoning, seeing it as an especially cowardly and dishonorable form of death. Others believe the king had more complex political motives. Eustace Chapu, an imperial ambassador and friend of Pfizer, speculated that the king may have acted with such intensity to divert suspicion from himself and the Bullen family, whom some rumors suggested had orchestrated the poisoning. The king's swift and public execution of Roos could have been seen as a way to eliminate Pfizer, one of the greatest obstacles to his marriage plans. Richard Roos's fate was sealed as soon as a decision for his execution was made. The date was set for April 5th, 1531. Crowds gathered at Smithfield, eager to witness this rare and gruesome event. People jostled for a good viewing spot, and street vendors hawked food and drinks, treating the execution as a spectacle rather than a tragic death. The huge bronze cauldron was already bubbling with boiling water when Rose was brought forward. Some accounts suggest he was given alcohol to sedate him, a final act of mercy. Guards stripped him of his clothes and lifted him over the cauldron. A priest quickly said a prayer, offering absolution for his sins, but there would be no mercy for his body. What followed was one of the most horrifying executions in English history. Rose was dipped into the boiling water 3 times. The first dip submerged only his legs. His screams echoed to the square as his skin peeled off, causing some onlookers to faint or turn away in horror. The second dip submerged his torso, turning the once clear water pink as it dissolved his flesh. His screams were no longer human, replaced by gurgles as he struggled to breathe. The third and final dip completely immersed him in the boiling water, and after enduring unimaginable pain, death finally ended his torment. This execution wasn't an isolated case. Following the new law established by Henry VIII, anyone convicted of poisoning would meet the same fate. In 1542, Margaret Davies was boiled alive at Smithfield for allegedly poisoning 3 households. This brutal method of execution was not officially abolished until the reign of Henry's son, Edward VI, as part of reform to limit the most barbaric punishments. What makes Rose's case particularly disturbing is not just the cruelty of his execution, but the political context in which it took place. He was a victim of a volatile time in England, when the country was on the verge of significant religious and political change. Bishop John Pfizer, whom Rose allegedly attempted to kill, would meet his own tragic fate. In 1535, Pfizer was executed for refusing to acknowledge Henry VIII as the supreme head of the Church of England. His head was displayed on London Bridge until it became unrecognizable, only to be replaced by that of Thomas More, another opponent of the king. And Bullen, whose rise to the throne was indirectly related to Rose's case, would also meet a tragic end. In 1536, she was executed on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, charges widely believed to have been fabricated to allow Henry to marry his third wife, Jane Seymour. As for Henry VIII, he would continue his tumultuous reign for another 16 years, marrying for more times, breaking away from Rome, and transforming England into a Protestant nation. His paranoia and brutality would only increase, leaving a trail of blood that would forever mark English history. Today, the site where Richard Roos met his tragic end is a busy commercial center, with no plaque or monument to remember the horrors that took place there. Few Londoners walking through Smithfield today are aware that beneath their feet lies a spot where a man was slowly boiled alive in a bronze cauldron. The story of Richard Roos serves as a chilling reminder of a time when justice and cruelty were often intertwined, and when the powerful could rewrite laws to serve their whims. It's impossible to say whether Rose was truly guilty, whether he was a scapegoat for a larger conspiracy, or whether he made a tragic mistake. But what we do know is that his punishment was far beyond any sense of justice, even by the brutal standards of the time. Execution by boiling, a death that mirrors the very act of cooking, has a grim irony, as Roos, a cook by profession, met his end in a cauldron. It was a punishment that sought not only to eliminate the criminal, but to exact a terrible, poetic vengeance. 5 centuries have passed since that April afternoon in Smithfield, and the world has changed in ways Henry VIII could never have imagined. Our justice systems, though imperfect, now focus on rehabilitation rather than retribution. Laws are designed to be applied equally, regardless of status, and punishments, even for the most heinous crimes, do not include deliberate torture. However, the story of Richard Roos, the man who was boiled alive, still resonates today. It reminds us how thin the line is between civilization and barbarism, how institutions meant to protect citizens can become tools of terror when manipulated by those in power. Beneath the hurried steps of modern Londoners, the echoes of the past still linger. If we listen carefully, we may still hear the cries of a cuckoo on that gray April day in 1531. Learn the most horrific way what it means to be on the wrong side of the cauldron. The haunting story of Richard Roos's execution by boiling remains a chilling reminder of a darker time in history, where justice and cruelty were often one and the same. His tragic fate, set against the political turmoil of 16th century England, reflects how power can shape the laws of a land, often in devastating ways. While our justice systems today strive for fairness and rehabilitation, the legacy of such barbaric punishments continues to fascinate and disturb. Roos's story forces us to confront the fragility of civilization and the enduring consequences of unchecked authority. As we walk through modern-day London, it's impossible not to wonder how far we've come and how much of the past still echoes beneath our feet.